Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Lakshmi Narula, Associate Professor in Zoology from SGTB Khalsa College, University of Delhi. In this module, we are going to study about the population growth part 1 from Principles of Ecology paper. After studying this module, you shall be able to know about the need for the population growth, patterns of population growth, factors that determine exponential and sigmoid type of population growth, simulpares and heteropares reproductive strategies, exponential reproduction in simulpares populations. The study of population growth is the core of applied ecology. To grow with time is an inherent property of all forms of life. Population growth informs about the abundance or rarity of the population with time, which in turn determines the structure of a community in an ecosystem. Depending on the size and the reproductive potential, an animal may grow in size. It can grow in size every minute, like in case of bacteria, protozoan, etc. The growth can be in months, seasons or years, like most of the animals show, especially in case of fish, insects, birds, including the human population. There are several species of animals and plants which grow once in several years. For example, a population of elephants and a population of bamboo. Depending on the size of the organism and their reproductive potential, a population may grow in size every minute. For example, in case of bacteria and viruses, in days, like in case of protozoa, in months, in case of insects, every season in case of amphibians like frog, or once in hundreds of years like the flowering bamboos. As you can see in this picture, the bamboo tree breeds flowers only once in several years. The term biotic potential was coined for the first time by Chapman in 1928. The biotic potential is the maximum reproductive potential of a population under unlimited resources and other environmental conditions. It is generally denoted as R max. It is a theoretical concept, and this is observed only under the unlimited environmental conditions. M here denotes the maximum rate of reproduction. Since in nature all environmental factors are not limiting always, and they resist the populations to express their biotic potential. It is called environmental resistance to the biotic potential. This is a very important factor in the ecosystem balance. If all the populations start growing according to their biotic potential, it may lead to a complete loss of biodiversity from the biosphere. Therefore, for the ecosystem balance and the balance of life in the biosphere, it's very important that there is a resistance to the actual biotic potential of a population. In fact, biotic potential is a natural phenomenon for the survival and fitness of a species and population. Nature has provided all the populations with the maximum potential to reproduce, but nature has also countered it so that they maintain a balance in the ecosystem and biosphere. For the fast-growing species, the biotic potential can be easily demonstrated in a culture medium. For example, and the increase in the paramecium population density in the culture medium within 6 days, indicating its biotic potential. Similarly, in case of human population also, there is a tendency to grow exponentially. As you can see in this figure, there is a rapid increase in the population from 3 billion to 9 billions. In nature, no population reproduces as per its biotic potential due to the environmental and physiological resistance. Because if given an opportunity with the biotic potential, the whole land will be occupied only by a few species and the biodiversity will be lost from the biosphere, as it is clear from these examples. The slowest breeding animal, like elephant, a pair of elephants would have over 19 billion descendants alive after 750 years. Similarly, a single pair of housefly within 7 generations per year would produce 6 trillion houseflies. And in case of oyster, which produces 55 to 114 million eggs, the rate at which the population will increase, it will be tremendous and the resource will become unlimited. Thus, if given an opportunity with the biotic potential, the whole land will be occupied only by a few species and the biodiversity will be lost from the biosphere. In nature, two types of growth patterns have been observed. One, exponential, two, sigmoid. Sigmoid is also known as the logistic growth pattern. Exponential growth of a population was reported for the first time by Thomas Robert Malthus, who lived from 1766 to 1834, in his paper on principles of population, in which he proposed that the populations tend to increase faster than the means of their subsistence. The populations increase in the geometrical pattern like 2, 4, 8 and 16, whereas the food increases in the arithmetical progression like 2, 4, 6, 8 and so on. Using an exponential form of population growth, 2 fruit flies could produce enough offsprings to fill the space between the earth and the sun in only 1 year, if all the offsprings have survived their whole lifespan. As you can see in this curve, as proposed by Malthus, that there is a linear growth of the food and the geometric growth of the population. The population growth is J-shaped, whereas there is a straight line for the resource growth. Types of population reproductive strategies. Population growth patterns depend on their reproductive strategies. Two types of reproductive strategies are observed in nature. One, heteroparous, two, simulparous. Heteroparous population reproductive strategy. In this type of populations, they can reproduce more than once in their lifetime. The term heteroparity comes from the Latin word hetero, to repeat, pario, to beget. Thus, there are two or more overlapping generations of the organisms living at any one time. In other words, one generation of young individuals coexists with one older generation in the reproductively active state. Heteroparous vertebrates include most of the fish and reptile, all birds and mammals, including the human beings. Amongst the invertebrates, many species of mollusca, insects, and mosquitoes and cockroaches are heteroparous. Most of the perennial plants are heteroparous type of populations. Simulparous populations have only one reproduction in lifetime. The word simulparity comes from the Latin word simul, which means once or single time. The word pario, to beget. And this term simulparous was coined by Lamont Cole for the first time. In simiparous populations, the older generation is replaced by the younger one after its death. Now we can discuss about how the exponential growth takes place in simiparous populations. Since, as already said, these populations may breed usually at a particular time and at a specific stage of their life cycle. They rarely or never survive to breed again, as the single reproductive event of the simiparous populations, it is usually large as well as fatal. It is considered by some ecologists as being Big Bang reproduction. In discrete growth, the birth rate, the death rate, and the density of the organisms plays a very important role in determining the growth pattern. Now let's take some of the examples of the simiparous populations. A very common and interesting example is of salmon, Pacific salmon fish, Oncorhynchus species. This organism lives for many years in the oceans and then it swims to the place of its birth, that is the freshwater streams, where it lays its eggs, that is the spawning, and after spawning the fish dies itself, so that after some time the eggs will float back to the oceans and they will give rise to the new generation. This is to reduce the competition between the adults and the young ones of a population, as well as these populations will have a tendency to produce a large number of eggs, so that at least some of them would be going back to the oceans for the survival of their progeny and maintenance of their population. The other simiparous animals include some species of butterflies, cicadas, mayflies, and many arachnids, some mollusks, some species of squids, and octopus. In plant kingdom, an annual plant that completes its life cycle in a single season is usually considered to be a simiparous population. Now, in case of simiparous population, the exponential growth is more commonly observed. They have a common history. For example, when these populations they breed, they can have two ways. One is the multiplication rate may be constant and the growth can occur, or the multiplication rate in case of simiparous populations may depend upon the population density. Population growth with the constant multiplication. Consider a species with a single annual breeding season and a lifespan of 1 year. Let each female reproduce R0, that is the net reproductive rate female offsprings on the average that survive to breed the following year. Then the population number N in the generations T, that is 0, 1, 2, 3 can be given as NT plus 1 is equal to R0 NT, where NT is the population size of the females at the age time T, and T plus 1 is the population size at the time T plus 1. R0 indicates the net reproductive rate or the number of the female offsprings produced per female per generation. As it is clear from this example, if put the value of R0 in this hypothetical case, R0 is 1.5, which is a constant. Starting population is N0, 10. Then the population size at the different times of the generation can be calculated as given in the following table. At 0 time, the population size we are starting with 10. So the NT will be 10. In generation 1, it will be 1.5 into 10 equal to 15. So the total number of individuals at one generation will be 15. Second generation, it will be 1.5 into 15 equal to 22.5. Third generation, 1.5 into 22.5 equal to 33.75. As you can see, if we plot this data on a curve, this is curvilinear curve indicating J shape. That is indicating the change in the population size with the time. This is with the constant multiplication rate, which we have taken as 0.5 on a simple graph. And if we plot this curve on a semi-log curve, it will show a straight line. This figure shows the geometric population growth with the discrete generation. The starting population in this case is 10, and there are 4 different values of R0 starting from 1.05, 1.1, 1.15 and 1.2. As the value of R0 increases, the population size increases more rapidly as observed with the steepness of the curve. The population increases at a much faster rate when the value of R0 is 1.2 than with R0 1.05. Second way of multiplication or the growth depends upon the population size or the density. Populations normally do not grow with a constant multiplication rate. If we look at the trajectories or the turnover of a species population, the multiplication changes with the change in the population size. This can be simply expressed in a mathematical model showing the linear relationship between the population density N on x-axis and the net reproductive rate R0 on the y-axis. The multiplication rate changes with the change in the population density. At high density, the birth rate decreases or the death rate increases due to several factors such as epidemics, predation, or the shortage of resource. At low densities, the birth rate increases and the death rate decreases due to less parasitic and predatory attacks and sufficient availability of the resource, resulting in fluctuations, oscillations, or a decline in the population. This can be simply expressed in a mathematical model showing a linear relationship between the population density N on the x-axis and the net reproductive rate R0 on the y-axis as shown in this figure. The net reproductive rate as a linear function of population density in this hypothetical data, the equilibrium density is obtained at 100 when the value of R0 is 1. That is, dn upon dt is equal to 0. As it is clear from this diagram that at the equilibrium point where the line crosses, R0 is equal to 1 is a point of equilibrium in the population density. At this point, the birth rate equals death rate and it is denoted as NEQ. The population density can be determined by using this curve showing equilibrium point. In this curve, we can apply the formula NT plus 1 is equal to R0 into NT, where Z it can be calculated in the following manner. Z is equal to N minus NQ, where Z is the deviation from the equilibrium density, N is the observed population density, NEQ is the equilibrium population size with R0 1, minus B denotes the slope of the line. R0 is equal to 1 minus B into N minus NQ as it shows the straight line curve. In this hypothetical example, the line shows B as 0.02 and equilibrium is 100. Therefore, nt plus 1 is equal to r0 nt, which is equal to 1 minus bz into n2. This property of the equation depends on the equilibrium density and the slope of the line, that what will be the population density. It will be clear from the following example. It will be clear from this data how can we calculate the population density. In a hypothetical figure, we have the value of B equal to 0.11, N equilibrium is 100, N0 is 10. Then Nt plus 1 is equal to R0, N2, Nt, and R0 is equal to 1 minus Bz, where the value of z is equal to n minus nq. Therefore, by applying this, n1 will be equal to 1 minus 0.011 into 10 minus 100 into 10 equal to 1.99 into 10, which will make 19.9 as the N1 population. Similarly, N2 will be equal to 1 minus 0.011 into 19.9 minus 100 into 19.9, which will be equal to 1.881 into 19.9 equal to 37.4, that is the density at second generation. Similarly, if we can calculate for N3, it will come 63.1, N4 will be 88.7, and N5 will be 99.7. Thus, the population converges towards equilibrium at 100. Thus, we can conclude from this example that 1. The populations normally do not grow with a constant multiplication rate. 2. If we look at the trajectories or the turnover of a species population through time, a variety of dynamics is observed in the population. That is, 1. Very little fluctuations, 2. Cyclical oscillations, and 3. The chaotic fluctuations. The value of L determines the pattern of oscillations or fluctuations in a population. If L denotes the value of B N EQ, then at the equilibrium state or with little fluctuation as it is observed, it is between 0 to 1. The convergent oscillations can be seen when the value is between 1 to 2. Indefinite stable oscillation result when L is between 2 to 2.5, and when the value of L approaches more than 2.57, the population fluctuations in the chaotic manner. As you can see in this diagram, when the value of B is equal to 0.018, if we plot the curve between the population size and generations up to 50, convergent oscillations are seen if L is between 1 and 2, making more or less a straight line. When the value of B is equal to 0.025, then if we plot the curve between population size and generations up to 50, you can see indefinite stable oscillations when the value of L is between 2 to 2.57. When the value of B is increased to 0.029, if we plot the similar curve, you can see there are fluctuations, and the fluctuations are also very erratic and chaotic in a manner, and it can lead to the complete elimination of a population also. The value of L in this case approaches more than 2.57. In this module, we have studied about the exponential growth pattern in case of simulparous populations which breed only once in their lifespan. Now, these populations which show exponential population growth pattern are commonly named as the R-selected species, and those populations which show a sigmoid or a logistic growth pattern, they are called as K-selected species. In the next module, we are going to study about the sigmoid growth pattern also. Now, the main differences between the R and the K-selected populations are as follows. 1. The climatic conditions in which the R-selected populations are found, mostly they are very variable and unpredictable, whereas the K-selected populations live under fairly constant and predictable conditions. The mortality is often due to some catastrophic reason in case of R-selected populations, whereas in case of K-selected populations, the mortality is directed or is determined by some factors. The survivorship curve of the R-selected populations always follows type 3, whereas in case of K-selected populations, it is type 1 or type 2. The survivorship is also, it is variable in time, that is, it can change with time, and it is not determined by the carrying capacity, whereas in case of K-selected populations, the growth is determined by the carrying capacity of the population, and near the carrying capacity, the populations may show oscillations or fluctuations. In case of the R-selected population, the population is very large and it colonizes a new uninhabited area at a very rapid rate. Whereas in case of the K-selected populations, recolonization of a new area is always very slow. And finally, it depends upon the carrying capacity when it comes to the equilibrium. The intra and interspecific competition in case of R-selected populations is variable and generally it is negligent, whereas in case of K-selected populations, the competition is always very intense and it is commonly referred to as keen type of competition, whereas in case of R-selected, it is referred to as lax type of competition. The selection favors rapid development of R-selected species, whereas K-selected species have a slower development rate. The value of maximum increase or the biotic potential is very high in case of R-selected populations, and in case of K-selected populations, it is determined by the competitive ability of the population. R-selected species show early reproduction. K-selected species show delayed reproduction. In case of R-selected populations, the body size is generally small, and in contrast to the K-selected, which are generally larger in size. The R-selected species are semiparous and show single reproduction, as we have stated in this module, whereas K-selected populations are heteroparous and show repeated reproduction. In case of R-selected population, the offsprings are produced in large number, whereas K-selected populations produce very few number progeny. The length of the lifespan is small in case of R-selected populations, and K-selected populations generally have a long lifespan, which may be years, months, or even a complete season. With respect to the succession, the R-selected species show early stages of succession, that is, the pioneer community is generally R-selected, whereas the late serial stages of the succession are observed in case of K-selected populations. In case of K-selected populations, you can see in this curve that there is a oscillation and fluctuation, and the population tries to maintain at an equilibrium, which is denoted by asymptote. So students, now let us summarize what have we studied in this module. To grow and sustain themselves in an ecosystem, it is an inherent property of all populations. The population growth is a result of addition of new individuals through the process of natality, that is the birth rate, and by immigration, and their decline is due to mortality, that is the death rate, and immigration, in which some individuals of the population they move out. The difference between these two parameters, that is the natality and the mortality, is referred to as the instantaneous rate of increase of a population, and it is denoted as R. R is a very important factor that determines the population growth. Malthus proposed that the population increases in a geometrical progression like 2, 4, 8 and 16, which is something like compound interest, whereas the food on which a population is dependent increases in arithmetical progression, that is 2, 4, 6 and 8, as we have seen in the graphical representation in the chapter. The environmental conditions are unlimiting and the population expands geometrically or exponentially, as is observed in small populations entering into a new vacant habitat. This is very clear from the Darwin's finches which inhabited the Galapagos Island, where all the niche were vacant for them and the population started increasing exponentially, which gave rise to the competition, and in fact from where he derived the theory of origin of species. The exponential growth is also commonly referred to as the Malthusian growth, and it is characterized by the constant birth and death rate, which means that is the intrinsic rate of population increase. This can take place only when there is a stable age distribution maintained indefinitely in a population. A species is considered to be a simulparous when it reproduces only single time in its whole lifespan or before it dies. A species is considered to be heteroparous if it continues to multiply several times, that is the parental generation is in the reproductive state as well as the offspring generation also enters into the reproductive age group. In case of simulparous life history, commonly observed, there are two patterns of growth. One is with the constant multiplication rate and the other is with the multiplication rate that depends upon the population density. The commonly referred simulparous species are known as the R-selected species. They are very small in size and they are generally seen as the pioneer community in the succession. The heteroparous species are commonly referred to as the K-selected species, and they have a longer lifespan, they are larger in size, and most of them they are seen in the later serial stages of the succession. The environment is never stable, it limits the population growth with respect to one or more than one factor. Therefore, the rate of growth is slowed down. It depends upon the carrying capacity of a resource. In R-selected population that show the exponential population growth, after attaining the maximum size, they may decline or they may completely crash. In fact, today the human population is having that threat.